안녕하세요. 매일매일 운동하기를 실천하고 있는 동탄 왕고입니다. 오늘도 비가 오고 있어요. 엄청 진짜 대박입니다. 근데 지금 장마정선이 남부 쪽에다가 지금 중부 쪽으로 올라오고 있다고 합니다. 어저께부터 계속 비가 오고 있는 것 같아요. 근데 이제 또 태풍도 온다고 하죠. 내일 모레 진짜 비가 며칠 동안 이렇게 올렸는지. 하지만 전 비가 온다고 해서 운동을 안 할 수가 없어요. 이걸 멈출 수가 없어. 계속 해야 돼. 어쩔 수가 없네. 에어컨은 24시간 틀어놓고 있습니다. 너무 습해요. 일단 오늘은 쉬는 날이어서 집에 하루 종일 있을 건데, 진짜 오늘은 아무것도 안 하려고 했는데 오전에 청소하고 여기 식탁 치우고 또 택배 온 게 엄청 많아서 그 택배 박스 정리하고 스티로폼 정리하고 쓰레기도 버리고 와야 되는데 비가 이렇게 와서 나가기엔 싫고, 일단 정리만 좀 해놓겠습니다. 졸리네요. 일단 오늘 운동 계속 할 겁니다. 이 영상만 할 게 아니고 계속 할 거예요. 계속 밥 먹고 또 하고 밥 먹고 또 하고. 일단은 CNN을 봐야겠죠.
Decontaminated, then how you have the proper natural resources, and that they are the one. If you will not take the action on time, that will be very late.
Well, thanks so much for joining us for this edition of Marketplace Africa. Take a look at our stories on our website and keep up with us on social media. From me, Eleni Jarkas here in Johannesburg, stay safe and I'll see you in the marketplace.
The Profit Point, in association with Dangote.
Conservation Center for the Grand Egyptian Museum, said to be the largest of its kind in the Middle East, all devoted to the art of conservation. You need intense concentration, a good eye and a steady hand. In the labs, almost a monastic silence. Over 5,000 artifacts to conserve from Tutankhamun alone. Everything is being freshly conserved so they can show it all for the very first time in the new museum.
I never thought to see young Egyptian genius with golden hands returning every piece back. That was the first thing that captured my heart.
turns to anger, violent clashes in the streets of Beirut as protesters demand answers after Tuesday's deadly explosion.
Brazil records more than 100,000 deaths from coronavirus. How President Jair Bolsonaro is reacting to the tragedy unfolding in his country. And
there'll be tumbleweed running through here. It'll be like a ghost town.
the hustle and bustle of city life diminished. We'll look at how the coronavirus pandemic has changed London. And welcome to CNN Newsroom, everyone. I'm Michael Holmes. Welcome everyone. Anguish giving way to anger in Beirut as frustrations about Tuesday's horrific explosion boil over. Protesters and police fought in the streets on Saturday, more than 230 people injured, a member of the security forces killed. The demonstrators are protesting what they say is government negligence that allowed several thousand tons of volatile ammonium nitrate to sit in a warehouse for years. 158 people now confirmed dead in the blast, with a staggering 6,000 injured. 21 people still officially missing. Lebanon's Prime Minister calling, meanwhile, for early elections, but that failed to quell the outrage on the streets. CNN's Ben Wiedemann has reported extensively on Lebanon through the years. He is based there now, and he tells us the explosion was the last straw for a country already on the edge.
They carried a banner with the names of those killed in Tuesday's massive blast. Beirut's initial shock, now white-hot fury. At a government, a political elite that through incompetence and corruption has pushed Lebanon to the brink. In their demands, there is no subtlety. We want to take revenge on them, says Fawaz Kasarwani. We want to hang them because they killed us. Our blood is still boiling over the people killed in the blast.
시위를 할 때 확실히 촛불 시위라든가 평화 시위가 확실히 자리를 잡은 것 같은데 다른 나라들은 아직도 돌 던지고
Ordinary citizens have lost so much.
방송을 또 어서 보여가지고 쓰고 다니는지 모르겠어.
They have little left to lose. They've seen the economy collapse, the local currency lose much of its value, hyperinflation, lengthy power cuts, and last Tuesday, a catastrophic explosion that killed more than 150 people, wounded thousands, and made at least 300,000 homeless. And now, the politicians are being called to account. Shame on them, says this protester. They killed their people. They impoverished us. We've lost everything, and still they cling to power. Other protesters occupied a variety of ministries, including the foreign ministry, where they burned a portrait of President Michel Aoun.
This day was declared as Yom el-Hisab, the day of judgment, and in the dock are the leaders of Lebanon who have overseen what is essentially the decline and fall of the Lebanese state.
A state struggling to maintain control of a population in revolt. A state under siege from its own people. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Beirut.
For more on this, let's turn to CNN senior international correspondent Howard Damon, who is joining me now live from Beirut. So we see this sort of universal anger, the protests we just saw there. What are the chances, though, that this tragedy will lead to real change for long-suffering Lebanese?
You know, Michael, and I hate to put it in these terms because there really is no silver lining when it comes to something on this scale, but if there was ever to be one, or if we were to talk about one, it could be that this was so horrific, so unacceptable that it might actually push and force the government in a way that the population's previous rage did not. We are seeing these moves by the government in terms of the early elections that have been called for, in terms of the resignation of a handful of MPs, but also when it comes to the rage of the population. I mean, as you heard in Ben's piece, they've had enough. I mean, that's it. How much more can Lebanon actually be expected to suffer? much more can the Lebanese be expected to suffer after having lived through civil war, running street battles in Beirut, multiple explosions and targeted assassinations? And at every point, Michael, just when the Lebanese would think that maybe their country was moving on the up, maybe things were stabilizing, but the population and the youth would feel as if they could reinvest in their own country, something would come to make it crash back down. I mean, that's it. This is it for this country.
We could make out what you're saying. The audio isn't perfect. We will be checking in with you later, though. Our Damon in Beirut, appreciate it. Thanks so much. Well, more than 100,000 people in Brazil have now been killed from coronavirus. It took the country less than 5 months to reach that mark. Here's what President Jair Bolsonaro posted on Facebook shortly after the number was announced. What was it? A picture of himself congratulating his football team for their win in the Sao Paulo Championship. Matt Rivers with more.
Well, we know that the outbreak in Brazil is one of the worst in the world, and the data that we get just continues to back that up. A horrible new milestone has been reached in Brazil, with the country's death toll now surpassing 100,000 for the first time. The overall number of cases in that country is also now topping 3 million for the first time. This after some new information on Saturday from the country's health ministry recorded nearly 50,000 newly confirmed cases and just over 900 newly confirmed deaths. Meanwhile, we did hear from President Jair Bolsonaro, who from the get-go has basically been flippant about the fact that tens of thousands of Brazilians have lost their lives. It was reacting to the news of 100,000 deaths that the president said, quote, "We are going to get on with life and look for a way to get away from this problem." Now, nearly 25% of all deaths recorded have come from the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo, which just on Saturday surpassed the 25,000 death threshold. But despite that, the state continues to advance its reopening plans. Since Thursday, bars and restaurants in the capital of Sao Paulo state can be open during the night, but the governor there said he is not going to allow in-person schooling to resume because he said any slip-up during this reopening could be fatal. Matt Rivers, CNN, Mexico City.
We'll call it pandemic fatigue or simply not caring, but in some places where coronavirus is raging, massive groups of people are getting too close for comfort. Here's a look at some of them. Crowded streets, packed bars. It's the weekend in Rio de Janeiro, and people are partying like there's no pandemic. There are few masks, no social distancing, even though the country's death toll from the coronavirus is around 100,000. I know that I'm not doing the best thing in being here, one student says, but at least I'm using a face mask. Those people are drinking, having a good time. They don't know where their cup came from. But Rio isn't the only place where people are out and about without taking proper precautions. Crowds packing the seaside resort of Blackpool in northwest England, filling the promenade and the beaches, with people trying to escape the summer heat, even though cases are on the rise across the UK. Paris is taking measures to crack down on scenes like this. As of Monday, masks will be required by everyone over 11 years of age in busy outdoor areas. Reaction so far, mixed. I find it unnecessary when there aren't many people, one resident says, but when there are more people, it is good that people wear masks. Vietnam is testing and testing again to contain an outbreak that began in the city of Da Nang. Officials say thousands of people who recently returned from the resort town will get more accurate swab tests instead of the ones they initially took. They say large-scale testing and strict community guidelines helped keep infections low once before. We got through the last time, one person says. As long as all of us comply with these policies, we will get through this together. Following the rules, heeding the science, right now they could be the best options to beat back the coronavirus. We'll take a quick break here on the program. When we come back, the US president has a track record of making false claims about the extent of coronavirus testing, but that's not the only problem. Why experts say even when tests are available, the results aren't necessarily reliable. We'll be right back.
This month, a special Inside the Middle East. Visit the largest museum of its kind, dedicated to one civilization. See Tutankhamun as you've never seen him before, up close and personal. The Grand Egyptian Museum and its artifacts spanning millennia.
We thought we should build the largest museum in the world. Cairo will be the city of museums.
Inside the Middle East, tonight on CNN.
If you're using hand sanitizer to help slow the spread of COVID-19, you'll want to check the label. The FDA says it's seeing an increase in hand sanitizer products contaminated with potentially poisonous methanol, which can be life-threatening if ingested and toxic if absorbed through the skin. The agency says states have also reported cases of blindness, hospitalizations, and deaths in adults and children after drinking hand sanitizer products tainted with methanol. When using hand sanitizer, the FDA says to make sure the product contains ethanol, which is safe for topical use, not methanol. The FDA says young children who accidentally drink hand sanitizer and adults who ingest it as a substitute for alcohol are the most at risk of poisoning and should seek immediate medical attention.
A year like no other means an election like no other. The 2020 conventions are coming. The Democrats, the Republicans. Special live coverage starts August 18th, only on CNN.
A mask can say a lot about the person who wears it. But even more about the person who doesn't.
Welcome back. Some experts say the US needs to rethink its national coronavirus testing strategy. A lot of people say it. They say symptomatic people are the ones being tested when contagious as well. Now, beyond that, there are huge backlogs, as we've been reporting. And as our Randy Kay reports now, when the results come in, they're not always dependable.
We have the best testing anywhere in the world.
If that's true, why are so many coronavirus test results wrong?
The FDA basically has created a wild, wild west environment for this testing, where under their approval process on an emergency basis, they've let tests on the market that basically have a very, very wide range of results.
You're doing great.
몇 분이죠?
Part of the
19분.
trouble with the standard nasal swab test is the virus isn't always lurking in the nasal passage. So a swab test may show the person is virus-free, even though the virus might be in the lungs or maybe the intestines.
The quality of these tests right now vary a great deal, and that's a challenge in terms of understanding if you get a negative result, is it really negative?
Other factors that could affect the accuracy of the test include the stage of the disease. A Boston pathologist tells CNN there's a window of about 1 week to catch the virus. Human error in administering the test and how the swab is transported may also lead to a false negative. On top of all the inaccuracies, results are often delayed. Here in Florida, residents have waited days, sometimes even weeks, to get their results, possibly allowing the virus to spread, which is why there was so much excitement about the so-called rapid tests, which return results in just minutes. There are several rapid tests on the market, but the president touted this one in March.
The FDA authorized a new test developed by Abbott Labs that delivers lightning-fast results in as little as 5 minutes. That's a whole new ballgame.
Trouble is, Abbott's ID Now rapid test, which is used at the White House, has proven to be less accurate. Back in May, researchers at NYU found Abbott's rapid test returned a false negative nearly 50% of the time, so they deemed it unacceptable for their patients. On its website, Abbott said in a statement that the NYU study is inconsistent with others that show Abbott's ID Now is more reliable. The FDA has received 176 reports of adverse events related to Abbott's ID Now test. 10 state health agencies told CNN in July they specifically recommend or require individuals who test negative on the Abbott rapid device be retested. Still, some experts, including scientists, believe despite the inaccuracies rapid tests have shown, it's still better to have more tests. Quantity over quality, they say, may be our best hope. Randy Kay, CNN, Palm Beach, Florida.
And I want to bring in Omar Ghana in Los Angeles for more on testing. He's the Director of Clinical Microbiology for the UCLA Health System. Great to have you on. I mean, when we listen to the stories on testing, I mean, we just saw in the past week the Ohio governor test positive ahead of a visit by the president and then test negative. It was a false positive. But, you know, that's the same test the White House is using to protect the president, which begs the question, if the reliability of testing for the president isn't great, then what chance the rest of us?
Yeah, you know, it's a great point. I think that the challenge with testing in almost all arenas is that no test is going to be perfect. And so there will be an error rate, be it false positives or false negatives. And if you're performing very, very large numbers of tests, even if the error rate is around 1 or 2%, which it is for a lot of clinical diagnostics, it's inevitable that we will have false positives and false negatives.
There are, and you make the point, there are so many tests out there. I mean, has the process, the availability and the quality of testing improved to where it should be this far into the pandemic? I mean, what would effective testing look like?
Well, you know, I will say that we've made incremental improvements since March or April, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. Now, I will say that the typical test that's performed in a laboratory does have good sensitivity and specificity, meaning its accuracy is very, very good. But there aren't nearly enough of those tests for the need across the country. In fact, it isn't even close.
Yeah, good point. A lot of people have been saying the same thing. I'm curious what you think, what damage has been done in terms of politics prevailing in the absence of a federal plan. I mean, everything seems so ad hoc, even swabs and the reagents are in short supply. How has that lack of a federal strategy hurt the efforts to have effective and reliable testing?
You know, to me, at least in the laboratory that I run, one of the major problems is shortage of the tests. And part of the challenge of not having a national strategy is that states or even hospital labs have to compete directly with one another for what is a shortage of resources and a shortage of tests. Whereas if there was a national strategy, and that national strategy involved ramping up and then distributing tests, I think that it would end up being better. We would have more tests available, especially for those places that are in the highest area of need. There are places across the country, as you mentioned in the story before, that people are waiting 7 to 10 days to get a test result. So clearly there isn't enough tests, and I believe a national plan would have been able to help with that, especially if it was impacted, let's say, or started in March. We could have been in a much different place than we are now.
Yeah, exactly. The delay is, that's crazy. I mean, I had a test because it was down the road and it was free and it took 7 days. That's kind of pointless. One of the dozens of authorised tests, of the dozens of authorised tests, I mean, most of them are these sort of complex laboratory procedures that you mentioned, the PCR, I guess, to detect the genetic material, and that's great. But only a handful of these quick and simple ones, these, I think they're called point of care setting, like if you're in a doctor's office or urgent care clinic. Why can't point of care testing become the norm?
You know, I think point of care testing can definitely help fill a gap. You know, the understanding is there aren't going to be enough complex laboratory tests to fill the need. And so we do need more point of care tests. The challenge is that they are not as accurate, but they're definitely better than no tests at all. So if they're used in the right patient population, or let's say they're used consecutively to test the patient, they definitely can achieve a higher accuracy and potentially fill a really great need across the country.
요거 마지막에 10개만 더 하고 그만하겠습니다.
밥을 먹어야겠어요. in Los Angeles. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate being on.
Well, thousands of people are descending upon Sturgis in South Dakota for a biker rally. Only 7,000 people live in that small town, but they're expecting some 250,000 visitors. And residents are worried the visitors will bring coronavirus. CNN's Ryan Young tells us what the bikers have to say.
When you get to Sturgis, South Dakota, one thing you'll notice right off the bat, the traffic has swelled here. This is a town of 7,000 normal.